Sometimes we forget why we're here. It's easy to fall off track. These help us remember.
These battle scars don't look like they're fading, don't look like they're ever gone away. They ain't never gonna change. These battles.
Growing up, I had a dream, something no one else could see. Tell me what it means when your faith is falling beneath your knees and you can't breathe. Everything you see reminds you of what you're not or something you won't be. You gotta take what you're given, that's how we live it. Don't be mad at the system, it's simply how we've existed. I hear a lot of people talking like they politicians and choose to be an accountant because it's safe in a business. Not because they wanna do it, just because they heard it pays. And who the fuck wants to be poor knowing that's how we've been raised? Society is getting heavy, I can feel the weight. The pressure of success is like 100 million pounds of shame. And that's the reason I'm staying up late, trying to find a way to escape the stereotypes. This day and age is making me feel like the only way I'll be happy is getting signed to a label and making money through rapping. I wanna share my emotion because this world is attacking the very principle of life that lets the people be happy. If you don't have a reason to breathe, why even live? These battle scars are impressions of everything that it is. That reached 100 million people, I tell them there's a reason that we're all created equal. Cause some decide to be great and some decide a sequel to an average person's life is simply what they want to be. So you make your decision, all I know is what I'm given. Won't define the life I lead or the way I dwell in existence. I've seen a greater image on the walls of where I'm living, and the words twisted and scripted remind me of something written. Faith is a gift that is given down to the people. If one believes it, one receives it. It's given if it is needed. Don't ever think you're trapped in a life that you never wanted. Your options are infinite, that's some mathematical logic. I'm not saying I'm a prophet, I'm speaking for what it's worth. These lyrics define my prayers and these battle scars on my church. Not saying I'm a prophet, I'm speaking for what it's worth. These lyrics define my prayers, these battle scars on my church.
Well, hello everyone. I am in the hotel lobby, so I can only be so loud. And as I had said before, I didn't bring a good microphone. I didn't really think I was going to be doing any live streaming. Silly me. So I'm just using the sound on my laptop, which is not the greatest. So I always count on your comments to let me know how it is going. So let's do a little bit of introduction and then we will get into it. This is a participatory program. I would love to interact with you, and if there are persons who might disagree with my point of view, I'm even willing to bring you on. If you have a webcam, I can send you a link. The only requirement is being respectful to everyone involved. I know there's a lot of feels going on, and, you know, in different venues, it might be appropriate to, you know, say certain names or whatever. That's not what this particular program is going to be about. I'm coming at this strictly from a procedural point of view, and we'll get into that more, but let me remind you and ask you if you like this kind of Libertarian Party content, which I think is fairly unique. Please consider joining my Patreon and becoming a monthly supporter. It would really, really assist me and touch my heart. As you all know, I'm generally, I drink my soda too fast, miserable in my day job, so help. You know, say blink if you're in trouble. Lord have mercy. Okay, nobody is saying anything wrong about the sound, so I'm just going to assume at least it's serviceable, even if it's not great. So let me put down this little large thing there, which I find very distracting. So today was the Libertarian Party of Pennsylvania convention. Like many conventions, it had the potential to be contentious, and in fact, it was contentious. Next week, Colorado, that will also be contentious. And Jason is telling me my Wi-Fi is buffering the video. That is the hotel Wi-Fi, but let me try something here. I think it might interrupt the broadcast. I'm wondering if I use my cell connection, if it would be better. Yeah, John Linsky says serviceable. Yeah, I'm sorry that the sound's not better. I'm going to try to move my laptop a little closer so that perhaps the sound's a little better. I will bring in the future a good microphone, because I did bring a good camera and decent lighting, actually, as you might be able to tell. Okay, so it was a potentially contentious convention that did, in fact, turn out to be contentious with a lot of, and basically it was between, let's just be blunt, between Mises caucus supporters and anti-Mises opponents, and then some people who were in between. And it was pretty obvious what the two extremes were. Now, I wasn't originally, when the convention first gavelled in, I was not the convention parliamentarian. But when I saw how things were quickly getting out of control, I went up front and tapped the convention chair, Mr. Steve Seats, on the shoulder and said, please let me help you. Please let me, and he agreed. So then I did serve as parliamentarian for the rest of that convention. Because I served as parliamentarian, though I am a voting member of the LPPPA, I added an extra P, LPPA, I didn't vote on anything. Even though their bylaws do allow parliamentarian to vote on ballot votes, I didn't vote on anything. That's just my personal ethics. I thought it was better to remain completely neutral. And also, because of that, my commentary here is going to be mostly procedural. I don't know anyone's motives, and neither does anyone else. You can guess motives, and I think you probably would have some reasonable guesses. But you want to know what? When it comes down to the rules, the motives are somewhat irrelevant. And I wish I had brought my copy of Roberts up here with me, because I'd like to have given some specific citations. I actually have it in Kindle, but it's over there. Just bear with me that my citations are going to be a little loose. If anyone has any questions, I can get you specific citations later. So here's what was at contention. There was one primary issue at contention, and I'm going to pull up their bylaws. I have it here. One sec, because I think it's important to actually see this language. So let me find it here. One second to my scenes. Let's go here. Okay. I think this is page 8 or 9 of their bylaws, but as you can see, it's Article 10 Convention, which the part that's in dispute is Section 2 Delegates. Every member in good standing of the party, as of 180 days before the convention, shall be entitled to be a delegate at such convention by attending in person. However, every attending member in good standing at the time of the convention may be a delegate if 2/3 of the delegates present in person who meet the aforesaid 180-day requirement vote to waive said requirement. Delegates must be registered Libertarian in Pennsylvania unless prohibited by law. That section was the issue, and a lot of issues got conflated and confused. So let's just go through this first before we apply it to what actually happened at the convention. And I am going to give some opinions of mine on this particular bylaw, because to me that's kind of outside of the convention itself. I'm not going to be commenting on personalities and stuff like that, with rare exception. There is a couple comments I'm going to make on personalities. Okay, I want to make sure I have comments up, because there we go, because I want to be able to interact with you guys. So they have a seasoning requirement. A seasoning requirement means a minimum number of days in order to be a voting delegate at convention. Colorado has 90. I believe Minnesota has 45. I see it ranging from, when they have them, because some states have no seasoning requirement, from 30 to 180. Personally, I think 180 is too long. My opinion, don't come for me, that's my opinion. I'm biased. I think Colorado's 90 is good, but I think 45 I would be okay with as well. 30 is too short, in my opinion. But I do believe seasoning requirements are important. I think the states that do not have them, such as Florida, I think that is just batshit crazy. You are asking for a takeover. And when I say takeover, I'm not talking about this unhinged anti-Mises stuff. We'll get into that as well. When I say takeover, I mean by non-libertarians. Not libertarians you just don't happen to agree with, not libertarians you just don't happen to like, but actual non-libertarians, such as what happened with some Virginia county affiliates. Some MAGA Republicans came in and took over. That is the purpose of a seasoning requirement. A lot of states put it into effect after the Howard Stern incident, where he packed a convention. That's when Colorado put in their seasoning requirement. So I'm entirely in favor of seasoning requirements. But there's more to it here. They also, in Pennsylvania, allow out-of-state membership. I think that's nuts. From what I understand, someone can correct me, California today got rid of its out-of-state memberships, and good for them if that is in fact correct. There's a whole reason you have delegate allocations by state, why you have state-specific bylaws, and I know I'm hearing the Libertarian in the background going, are you defending imaginary lines in the sand? No, I'm defending localism. How in the world can I, from Colorado, know what's best for Pennsylvania? I cannot. So I firmly believe that states need to protect their delegation and protect their memberships. If they don't, okay, but I think you're asking for trouble. You might ask, well, then why am I a member of Pennsylvania if I think it's a bad idea? One reason I'm a member is if it ever comes up to vote to make me not a member, I will vote to make me not a member. If I were in California this weekend, I would have voted to eliminate out-of-state memberships. I think it's terrible for those states. But also because I was invited. I was asked to by certain members of the Libertarian Party of Pennsylvania to join, just like I was personally invited to join California. I didn't go seeking it. I haven't voted in California or Pennsylvania, though I have voting rights and I might in the future. I have never yet so far. And I was here as a speaker and then also served as the convention parliamentarian. So there's that issue. Now, there's a third issue, and that is there's been a lot of confusion as to what it means to suspend the rules. I often hear people with states with seasoning requirements go, well, we could just suspend that. We could just suspend the rules. Not speaking here of Pennsylvania, because we'll get to Pennsylvania, but in general, no, you can't. You cannot suspend bylaws. Even if everyone in the room agrees, you cannot suspend bylaws. You cannot suspend bylaws even with unanimous consent, unless, okay, and here's where the unless is. And this isn't unorthodox. Roberts specifically provides for this. This might even be a direct quote, that you cannot suspend a bylaw unless the bylaw contains within itself provisions for its own suspension, which Pennsylvania does. It gives a way that the bylaw can be suspended. Now, you are allowed to do that. Without that provision, it would be unsuspendable. There is no purpose, in my view, of having a anti-takeover provision that can be suspended. That's like saying, I'm on a diet, but I'm going to keep a cheesecake in front of my face. You're setting yourself up for failure of that particular thing. An anti-takeover provision is supposed to be like a self-destruct mechanism to protect the party. If it can be suspended by any amount, the people who want to take over just need to make sure they have that amount to suspend it and then open the floodgates for everything. There's no point in having an anti-takeover provision if you're going to allow it to be suspended. You might as well just not have it. And I hope from the nightmare that happened in some ways today that future bylaws committees in Pennsylvania consider taking that out. Because now all that's happened is a lot of hard feelings. You have new members, brand new members, who now, whether you think they're right or wrong, feel like they were just shat on by the older party members. For what? Do you really want your party members to feel that way? And that's all that happens with this suspension. You're setting yourself up for hurt feelings and strife within the party. Either have a seasoning requirement or don't. But this isn't right. Or as my mom would say, shit or get off the pot. Okay? You can't have it. You can't have your cake and eat it too, which is what this is trying to do. My particular advice, both as a member and also as their parliamentarian for this convention, that they should really take a look at this because it caused a lot of problems. Okay, so what happened is in the past, they routinely invoked the suspension. Apparently, I was told for the past 15 years. I don't know if that's true or not. I don't care, to be honest with you, if it's true or not. Because a suspension of the rules is not something that you can count as a custom. It each year falls or stands on its own merits. The fact that 15 years have done it is completely irrelevant as to whether you do it today. Because this isn't something that says it becomes more suspendable the more you do it. No, it's each convention is on its own merits. So this whole thing that we've done it before and we're not doing it now, that is completely irrelevant. Because waiving a rule is a privilege. It's not a right. And you have no right to demand a privilege. No one is being robbed of anything if they are not granted a privilege. Let me give you an example. Let's say for 15 years, every day I walked by a homeless man on the street and I gave him $1 every day for 15 years. And then one day I decide not to. Does he have a right to complain on the day I don't? No, he's not entitled to that privilege. It's something I grant or cannot grant. And I don't have to give a reason for it either. And I could have a perfectly bad motivation for not giving it on that particular day. I could be in a bad mood. I could decide that day that I just don't like men and I'm not going to give this man $1. It's irrelevant. My motive is irrelevant. Motive is irrelevant to procedure. You might want to judge those people's morality or ethics. That's different. And that's not the job of the convention parliamentarian. So I am not going to infer anyone's motives on this. And in fact, though, if the motive was to have one's preferred candidate win a race that you don't think they could win, if extra delegates were let in, there's actually nothing unethical about that. That is called politics. That's why you call and ask people to come to the convention. How is that any more unethical than making sure people come to vote for you? That's just politics. There's nothing unethical about that motive. I'm sorry, that's just the way the system is played. It's called strategy. So on that issue, I am criticizing some of the rhetoric that is coming out of the Mises Caucus. Don't worry, I've got rhetoric, I've got criticism for everybody. But what happened is you have new people who didn't qualify within the 180 days that are being told that they were disenfranchised. And they're going to now, their life in the Libertarian Party has started off on a very, very bad foot. And that was first enabled by this very bad bylaw. But then it's being enabled also by telling them they were robbed of something. No, they were not. You cannot be robbed of something you were entitled to. You were denied a favor, but nobody is obligated to give you a favor. And it takes a special, you can't demand a favor. You simply cannot. But I can't expect these new delegates to understand that. They don't understand the system. All they know is they're being told by people who've been in the party a while that they just got disenfranchised. And I'd be really hurt about that if I were you. I would think I was just shat on. But the fact is they were not disenfranchised. You cannot be disenfranchised unless you had a right, not an option, not a potential, a right to be enfranchised in order to be disenfranchised. They were not. They were denied an exception to a rule. It could be very disappointing. It could be some kind of judgment as to how they might vote, but it's not disenfranchisement. Now, some people were making the analogy to the National Convention of us allowing in the virtual delegates. In that circumstance, I would say the virtual delegates were being disenfranchised, even though national bylaws don't apply that right. But let me explain why. That was an entirely different situation. There were people who could not come to the National Convention, either because of their own worries for the health of themselves or their loved ones, or travel restrictions by their states. Were there some people who could have come and just chose to stay home? Sure. But that isn't really what the issue was that year. That was something, an act of God outside of our control that prevented these people. There was nothing that happened 180 days ago in Pennsylvania that prevented anyone from registering or in paying dues. Nothing. It's not comparable whatsoever, and it's not helpful. And I don't think it's fair to compare the two situations. Absolutely nothing stopped people from complying with this bylaw except ignorance of the bylaw or lack of preparedness. And hopefully that's just a lesson learned. But unfortunately now, for us as a party, we've got a lot of real disappointed new people who deserved different. I'm not saying they deserved to be credentialed because, again, that's a privilege. But they deserve to have this explained to them a little better so that they didn't feel hurt or like nobody cared about them, because that's the way a lot of people feel right now. And another reason why this bylaw is terrible. If I can't say that enough, bad bylaw, bad bylaw. That waiver needs to die in a fire. It's terrible. I see here Jason is asking, is there some debate for the culture of it? That is a very real thing we are facing in combating the welfare state. I'm not sure of the context of that statement, Jason. it probably made sense when you typed it right after I said something, but at this point, I'm kind of confused. So maybe you could explain. I'll try to keep closer eye on the chat. So that is the first issue. However, there is a group of delegates that I do think were disenfranchised. But let's put them aside for one moment. And we're talking about 20 people or less, not the 100 and something of these new people. I also want to deal with here, delegates must be registered Libertarian in Pennsylvania unless prohibited by law. A huge straw man or rabbit trail or red herring, however you want to put it, happened with regard to that sentence. Because it turns out that the state of Pennsylvania doesn't count in their system. You could fill out the application, but they don't flip the switch, so it were, to change your registration when it's a certain number of days before the primary, and here it was something like you had to do it before May 3rd. That is irrelevant because that's way after the 180 days. That only would have become relevant if the bylaw was waived, and then they would have to decide if the people in this little May 3rd window that it wasn't yet showing up in the state database. It was an irrelevant issue until the bylaw was waived, which it never was. So that issue should never have come up until that point. Because then they started arguing, and I know some people will not agree with me here, and what I'm going to say here, there's many reasonable interpretations. This just happens to be mine. The question came up, when is somebody a registered Libertarian? Is it when they filled out the application, or is it when it is recorded by the state? My opinion is, absent a bylaw provision clarifying that, it is when it's recorded by the state. Because party registration is a fiction that is a creation of the state, and until the state recognizes it, it's not real. Now in Colorado, we solve that by putting in our bylaws that it's when you sign the application. If it doesn't show up in the system and you can show a signed application, we will take that. And that's fine, but we put that in the bylaws. Absent that being in the bylaws, I think the only unambiguous determination of when somebody is a registered Libertarian is when it's recorded in the state database. If you don't like that, change that in the bylaws. But that never even should have came up because we didn't even get to that point. But debate went into that anyway. And I missed that at the time because, again, I'm not from Pennsylvania. You know, things were going crazy, or I would have advised the chair that he should rule that discussion germane, not germane. But anyway, that got brought up. So if anyone was wondering what happened with that. Now, there were ballots. I wish I brought the ballots down. There were pre-printed ballots passed out ahead of time. The first question on the ballot was whether or not this waiver would be made. And I've seen some complaints. Listen, there's something when you disagree with people, don't overstate your case and only rely upon your best arguments. Because what happens when you dogpile arguments, when someone refutes one of your weaker arguments, it kind of makes onlookers look like all your arguments are that weak because they're assuming you're only putting forth your strong arguments. There were complaints as why was there already a pre-printed ballot for that motion before that motion was even made. You can't have it both ways. You can't say we do this every year for 15 years and then complain that the convention committee anticipated that this question would come up again and proactively printed a ballot. You can't have it both ways. That's not fair at all. If this is a question that has come up consistently for 15 years, yeah, preparing the ballot ahead of time is just good preparation. But nobody officially made the motion. true. So there was a complaint. Why did we start voting on something when a motion wasn't officially made? I think that is putting form over function and being a slave to the rules rather than the rules serving the body. It is obvious that question was ripe. Everyone was already talking about it. The fact that nobody uttered the magic words, I move X, I think is being a bit pedantic. And when it is obvious what the will of the room is, the will of the room was to hear this motion, it is perfectly acceptable under Roberts for the chair to assume a motion. We did that in Kansas when I was parliamentarian there. So I don't think that's valid at all. I think it was perfectly fine to assume that motion. And nobody objected to the assuming of that motion. Now I'm going to start to criticize the other side. I have criticisms all around. And that shouldn't be considered as being overly critical. These situations are stressful. Everyone's going to make a mistake. And it's not easy to be a presiding officer. And Chair Sheets admitted to me he messed this up. When he assumed the motion, he proceeded directly into telling people to cast their ballots and didn't allow for debate. It isn't that he disallowed debate, he just forgot. He just didn't even, my opinion, he got flustered. There were a bunch of people crowding around the podium, and he should have told them all to just sit down, which is what I eventually did, I asked him to tell them to. I'm like, Mr. Chair, nobody should be standing around the podium. Your advisors or whoever's assisting should sit down. It's undermining your authority. The parliamentarian should not be standing, because there was another person there also assisting, but with a 1950s version of Robert's rules. Nobody should be standing there. Only the chair should be standing. That is the symbol of the chair's authority to preside. And things got better after that. But I do think the chair got flustered. I don't think it was malicious to not allow debate. And I don't even want to say not allow, because that implies like something that was intentionally done. Debate just wasn't called for. And I do think that was inadvertent. And when I brought it to his attention, he said, yeah, I fucked that up. It happens. Doesn't make it right. But I also personally, seeing the expression on the face, judging by my own personal judgment, I don't think that was malicious. And I always think it's better to assume the best rather than assuming the worst. And it turned out almost to be moot, and I'll explain why. So there was a big mix-up there. He should have allowed debate. So the ballots were cast. They were written ballots. And they came back overwhelmingly against waiving the rule. I don't know the exact number, but I think it was like 65 no, 38 yes. So obviously did not pass by 2/3 of the delegates present. But the number of people voting exceeded the number of people on the initial credentials report. Oops, right? So they investigated, and at least to me, plausible explanation was given as to how that happened. It was a mistake. You learn from these mistakes. They got swamped at credentialing. I know there's a lot of arguments that other people volunteered and they declined. I don't know. That's not my business. I will not get into the private business of an affiliate that I don't live at. But what happened is some people were being credentialed on Civi CRM, and other people that they were having difficulties finding, their names were just written down and they forgot to combine the two lists. That is a perfectly reasonable explanation. But they went through the process again and did an updated credentials report, which was accepted. And then I think the total number of credentialed delegates that were voting on whether to credential additional delegates was 114. Okay. Now, we're going to step back a little bit. When the chair assumed the vote on this motion to waive the 180-day requirement, somebody moved to divide the question. That really wasn't the proper motion to make, but again, I don't believe in form over function. I believe the rules are there to serve us. We are not there to serve the rules. And what they wanted, and this was a Mises Caucus, a representative, and I think what they wanted was actually admirable, and I don't think they're being given credit for this. And so I want to stress this, because some of the things that people are saying about the Mises people, at least in this regard, are absolutely false and slanderous. And I hope I'm showing my good faith here, where I am dishing out criticism all around. If you could hear me criticize the Mises Caucus on the disenfranchisement issue, but now your butthole's getting all tightened about me now saying that they're not being given proper good faith, well, then you're a partisan, and you're not really listening to me. You don't want to be equitable if you can only hear criticism of one side. That goes both ways. And I'm not sure if it was Michael Heiss that made the motion, but it was a Mises Caucus person. The division that they wanted to make was to waive the 180-day requirement only for people who lived in Pennsylvania. That actually is very admirable, because allegations were being made that the Mises Caucus people were busing in people from out of state in order to pack the convention. If you are alleging that is what the Mises Caucus did, at the time you were making the allegation, you were maybe ignorant of what I'm telling you. But if you make it after knowing this information, you are lying, because their expressed goal was to exclude out-of-staters who did not meet the 180-day requirement. If they were busing in people to pack the convention, they would not have tried to exclude those very people. Be honest, Pinocchio. If you're going to go after the Mises Caucus, at least do it on legitimate grounds, and this is not a legitimate ground. I think it was perfectly admirable to want to have that requirement waived for only Pennsylvania members. Now, you might not have realized that's what they were doing, but now that you know it, I hope some of these slanders will go away. So, then the question became, can you do that? Is this a non-fungible lump of delegates that you either take all of them that didn't meet the 180, or can you parse it out? The chair refused the point of order, saying the bylaw is not ambiguous. And let me read the bylaw again. However, this is the key word, every attending member in good standing at the time of the convention. Now, here's where I think there was some ambiguity, but we'll get into this. Every attending member in good standing at the time of the convention may be a delegate if 2/3 of the delegates present in person, blah, blah, blah. The chair felt that the word every attending member meant you either take them all or you take them none. I don't think that is an unreasonable interpretation. I'm not sure I agree with it 100%, but I don't think it was in bad faith, and I don't think it was unreasonable. And when a chair legitimately believes that a bylaw is not ambiguous, the proper thing to do is for them to refuse a point of order. Because if it's not ambiguous, as I said before, it doesn't matter if everyone in the room hates the bylaw, no matter how inconvenient the bylaw may be. It only becomes subject to an interpretation or an appeal if there is ambiguity. And the chair is the last bulwark on that. You can disagree, at which point you can then move to remove the chair for the convention from presiding, or for that question, and no one made that motion. So the chair was absolutely procedurally correct in refusing to hear that point of order, if he legitimately believed it was unambiguous. I'm not going to get into what people really believed or not. I'm not God, neither are you. I am taking his assertion at face value that he thought it was unambiguous. I did, as the parliamentarian, confer with him to tell him where I saw there was an argument for an ambiguity. And let me explain to you in case you don't see it. It's that word may. It says every attending member may be. So I think the lump sum is a may, meaning some of them may be, some of them may not be, and that the delegates did have the right to parse it out. And that also goes under a principle of interpretation in Roberts. This is where I really wish I brought the book to cite it, where it says that the bylaws allow one thing, that's you can't allow greater, but you can allow less. That is a basic principle of interpretation. So in combination with with may and that principle of interpretation, I think an argument could have been made. But I don't think it's a particularly strong argument. It's a could have. But that's the prerogative of the chair at that point, and the body then's prerogative is to then try to remove the chair from considering that. Me personally, if I were the chair, and I originally said it was unambiguous, and someone I respected enough to be my convention parliamentarian said, here's a possible ambiguity. What I would have done, but I was not convention chair, I did not have that honor, I was not elected by the delegates, I would have submitted it to the judgment of the delegates. I wouldn't have even have made a ruling. I would have said the chair is in doubt, and I would have submitted it to the judgment of the delegates. But 2020 is hindsight. I think that's what I would have done, but maybe under the pressure of the moment, I wouldn't have. But I don't think this was some gross violation that it's being made to be. I think the chair did what he felt was his duty to do. Just like when I was insisting that we had to have an in-person convention, and a lot of people got angry at me with that. But I insisted upon that because I felt it was my fiduciary duty to hold that position, not because I had some kind of fetish for an in-person convention. In fact, at the time, I was in severe financial trouble, and it would have been in my best interest to not have an in-person convention, because those tickets and that trip to Florida, and some people saw I had that big suite because I knew I would have to have tellers. That suite was $5,000. Okay, I've been in financial trouble ever since then. I mean, I'm behind in my mortgage. I was behind in my mortgage then. It was against my self-interest, but I'm not there to serve my self-interest, and neither is any other chair. You can disagree with his interpretation, but if he really believed that, he did the only thing he could do. I do think there was a judgment call error, but that's why they call it a judgment call. We're only human. So then it was decided not to be divisible. I wish it was put up to the judgment of the assembly. Then it would have been made obvious that the Mises people were not trying to bus in out-of-state people. And I'm not going to denigrate what any other group did, but I think it's somewhat disingenuous for one side to be saying to the other that you're just trying to bus in out-of-state people when both sides had people from out-of-state come in, whether they met the 180 or not. And I also think it's disingenuous to complain about out-of-state people when your bylaws allow out-of-state people. If you're getting butthurt about out-of-state people, then do the right thing and don't allow out-of-state memberships. Protect your delegation. But if you're not going to do that, don't complain. I'm going to give you another old mom expression. You made your bed, you gotta lie in it. continuing. So that first vote went forward with no debate, though there should have been debate. So I said in one sense where I thought the chair was right, one sense I thought the chair was wrong. Well, I don't think there was any. I thought he was completely right. I don't think it was outrageous that he didn't allow the point of the appeal. Let me just put it that way, or the point of order. I would have done it differently, but again, there's discretion in being a chair. After, and then I said it ended up being moot anyway, and now I'm going to explain how it ended up being moot. After the vote came out, somebody who voted on the prevailing side, which was the noes, moved to reconsider the question. You're allowed to do that. And it basically started the whole thing over again. And I advised the chair that in debating whether or not to reconsider that motion, you can, in the debate to consider the reconsideration, you can fully debate the merits of the underlying motion. So the underlying motion did eventually get full debate. So while the chair did screw up in not allowing debate the first time, it was fully debated during the motion for reconsideration. Yes, you can argue that by then people were frustrated and maybe they wouldn't, they would have been more persuadable earlier. Yeah, okay, that might in fact be the case. But the fact is, there was a full debate that ended up happening later. So it was mitigated. You know, the best way fallible human beings can. And there's where the chair made another error. But this error was in favor of the delegates that ended up not being seated, and in favor of the Mises people who were complaining. And what was this error? And I told him of it, and he decided to let it slide. And I don't know why, but I can tell you why I would have let it slide if I were the chair. Here's why I'm considered a heretic in the Robert's Rules of Order community. Robert's Rules of Order isn't based upon principles of equity, and equity is not a bad word, no matter what the left has twisted it to be. It just has a different standard. So let me tell you the error, and I'll tell you why. Even though it was technically an error, if I were a chair, I would have allowed it too. The rules be damned, in a way, unless I got challenged, unless somebody from the audience objected. The chair allowed people to debate he allowed non-credentialed delegates to debate. The very delegates that were in question were debating and arguing for their own seating. They're not allowed to do that. We learned that in Orlando. The virtual delegates were not allowed to debate. Only the delegates who were actually credentialed were allowed to debate. So here, at least half, and I think it might even have been more than half, of the people who debated were not already credentialed delegates. It was the delegates in question, the new people. Their voices were heard. That was an error, and it was in their favor. Steve should have, if he wanted to be a stickler for the rules, have disallowed them from debating on their own behalf. While that is technically wrong, and I advised him so, I would have let it slide too, because I think it's only fair to let the people who are going to be excluded argue their own case. Roberts disagrees, but for principles of equity, I would have allowed them to debate too. But if Steve was doing everything in his power to try to keep there from being additional delegates, why would he allow them to speak on their own behalf? This is why I don't believe, and I know people will disagree with me, but I have never lied to you. I've never not told you exactly how I feel. And I hope that's why a lot of people respect me on this issue, even when they don't agree. that you realize that I'm coming from a position of my own principle. You might not agree with it, but that I do have a logical reasons case for why I think something. And I try to be fair. Because on none of this, it doesn't matter who I liked or didn't like. There are people in here whose side I'm taking up in a way that they're not my BFF. But that's irrelevant. Rights aren't dependent, and equity is not dependent upon whether I like you or not. So everyone got to fully debate, which they probably wouldn't have been done if Steve didn't make the mistake the first time and not allow debate. So be careful sometimes what you ask for. And then it was re-voted again. Actually, a really weird thing happened, and I'm still not so sure it was kosher, but there was no harm, no foul. While we were debating, or they were debating, the motion to reconsider, someone then moved to postpone indefinitely. It was a superfluous motion. Should it have been allowed? I finally advised Steve, yeah, I don't think it's wise, because all you need to do to accomplish the same thing is vote down the motion to reconsider. But there might have been, I can think of an issue where maybe it was more wise because they wanted to keep the motion to reconsider from not coming up the next day. But by the time of the next day, the elections would have already been over. So I don't think that was a real fear. But anyway, the motion to postpone indefinitely, which basically kills the motion to reconsider, kills it, passed. But when you're debating the motion to postpone, you can fully go into the debate merits of the underlying motion, which was a motion to reconsider, which allows you to fully go into the merits of the underlying motion. So there was debate upon debate. There was full debate. The motion to postpone indefinitely passed. And there was a lot of time wasted in a lot of this, but that's the crux of how these delegates got excluded. There were some mistakes made, but I think they were mitigated. And 2 points I want to put here in favor of both sides. No, nobody was disenfranchised, but I'm going to get to those 20 delegates that I think were in one moment. But 2, no, the Mises Caucus was not trying to stack the convention with out-of-state delegates. Stop lying about that. So there's 2 points. Now let's talk about the 20 delegates that I think arguably 20 or so were disenfranchised. I was standing next to one. I probably wouldn't have a strong opinion about this if I wasn't standing in the credentialing line next to one of these delegates. She gave her name, was well known by people in Pennsylvania, obviously a long-term attendee of conventions, you know, somebody who had been around a while. And when they looked her up in the Secretary of State database, it said that she had switched her party registration to unaffiliated. And the look of shock on her face was genuine. She's like, I absolutely did not. I believed her. Nobody's that good of an actress. Which means that there was an error in the Secretary of State system, which is not unheard of. Anyone in states with partisan registration has heard valid complaints of people who say that their party affiliation has been changed from Libertarian to something else without their consent. And in Pennsylvania, it shows their voting record as well. And this lady had voted Libertarian in every election she voted in. But she skipped a couple elections. And what I suspect happened is that the Secretary of State, when she skipped a couple of elections, switched without her consent her party affiliation to unaffiliated. And there were about 20 people who claimed the exact same thing, well-known people in the party. So the 180 days wasn't an issue for these people. The issue was, did the Secretary of State switch their party affiliation without their consent? And I believe the Secretary of State did. And that those 20 should have been considered separately and that the delegates could have said, we believe you, basically. But no one made that motion. Someone should have made the motion about those 20. So I do think there was about 20 people who were legitimately, I don't want to say disenfranchised because that implies an active act. No one made the motion. So let's just say they probably should have been able to vote, but they didn't take the proper steps to have the matter heard by the delegates. And sometimes that's just because people aren't familiar with their rights or their rules. And this is why we need to train our delegates in the basics of Roberts. It's really not scary. Anybody out there, if you want me to do a training class before your convention for your delegates to try to get them up to speed, at least so that they can be a little bit more educated, reach out to me. I'll gladly do that. So those 20, I do think have a legitimate case to be pretty butthurt, but nobody made the motion. I think it's one of those cases where you could be angry, but there's really no one to be angry at, but it did suck for them kind of thing. Okay, so hopefully that was clear, and I don't see any additional comments. I see Reed saying hi, so hi there. Okay, so that got us to that point, and that seems to me to be the main issue of the convention. So all of the rhetoric that is going around, not all of it, 90% of the rhetoric that's going around is incorrect. There are people lying about the motivations of the Mises Caucus packing the convention. That is absolutely not true. And then there are people, I think, assigning bad motives to the chair that I don't believe were in play at the convention. And there's also the language of disenfranchisement, which all it's doing is hurting the feelings. And I'm not saying that pejoratively, because I do think people's feelings are important. I'm not saying that like, ooh, you snowflake, you stupid feels. No, I think our feels are important. And that's a terrible way for new people to start off in the party. Die, bylaw. Die, die, die. And then the elections proceeded. And whether you want to call it the old guard or the favored of the people in party were generally the people who won the election. I don't have a dog in the fight. I'm not even getting into that. Some Mises people win, some Mises people didn't. Now I'm going to make a comment, though. On both sides, I'm almost tempted to name names on one, and I'm still considering whether I should. Probably not. It's my practice not to name names. On both sides, there were several people who behaved very badly. The one I think was worse than the other. And the one that was worse than the other was an anti-Mises person. On the other side, I think we had a Mises person who was just really, really frustrated and was being a bit belligerent, but wasn't being abusive. But the anti-Mises person I'm referring to should have been thrown out of the convention, in my particular point of view. You don't get on the mic and allege all these fever dreams of racism. You don't say to a new person's face, fuck you, brother. No, he should have been escorted out of the convention. If I was convention chair, he would have been gone. My opinion. Those of you who are there probably know exactly who I'm referring to. Actually, you probably have several candidates. Just I was closer to one to actually hear what they got to say. That behavior was absolutely inexcusable. And if that person hears this and we're going back tomorrow, you should ask for announcement time to get up and deliver a verbal apology. That was inexcusable. The person on the Mises side who got a little bit belligerent and maybe too rambunctious, I actually think that they also should probably get on the mic. But they were not abusive. Getting overly passionate and up in your feels and maybe getting a little bit overly aggressive, I've done that more times than I can count. I get it. I get it. And I joked around, though, when you do that, you end up alienating people. There was one, and I say this with fondness. I say, don't be the Aaron Starr of the convention. And what I mean by saying this with fondness is I like Aaron. Aaron is smart, and he knows Roberts. But what he's not good at is reading the room. Read the room. It doesn't matter how right you are sometimes. If you're going to continually argue on the losing side, you're going to irritate the living hell out of everybody. And later on in the afternoon, they'll start voting against you out of spite, which is what happened to Aaron in 2018 during the platform committee report. The minute he got up to argue against it, everyone decided they'd vote for it just to irritate Aaron. Don't do that. So I have no, unkindness to say to Aaron. I just think that he doesn't read the room well. And this is just my encouragement to everyone to learn to read the room and pick your battles. But on the other side, on the anti-Mises side, there were some people who ought to be thoroughly ashamed of themselves with the way they behaved. You know better. Completely indecorous and brought shame upon the Libertarian Party of Pennsylvania with your behavior. And I'm a member of the Libertarian Party of Pennsylvania, so I feel that I can say that. And if I were convention chair, you'd have been escorted out. And you could have appealed it to the judicial committee or whatever, or to the delegates right then. But that behavior was absolutely inexcusable. And new people who saw that, I don't know if I'd come back. And whatever new person he said, fuck you in the face of, I don't know if I would have come back if I'm that person. So if you're that new person here, and that was you, you were wronged, and that person should have never have done that to you. So that's not typical. And I'm trying to think of anything else really I needed to cover. I think I covered most of the controversies. I hope I gave a unemotional, procedural opinion of what happened. I did miss the judicial committee elections, but from what I understand, there wasn't anything controversial there. Something I ate at lunch didn't agree with me, and I asked Steve, I said, it looks like things are calmed down, can I be excused? And he did. One thing though, I wasn't there, so I'm taking people's word for it that this was done wrong. Someone moved to adjourn, and they just adjourned. There is, well, I wasn't there, so I don't really want to speculate. But from what I understand, it was not an adjournment sine die, which means that the convention session is still open tomorrow. So people shouldn't be leaving tonight because business can still be conducted tomorrow. And if your desire is to close, then what you need to do is stand up and move to adjourn, the magic words, sine die. But if you want to do further business, then that's up to you. But I'm just saying, right now, you still have a live convention. Don't think because there was a motion to adjourn. There's a difference between adjournment and adjournment sine die. So I'm just now thinking if there's anything else, because I didn't take notes that I wanted to cover. Nope, I'm going to see if there's comments of anything else that anyone might like to cover. And I've gotten in some heated debates with people today. I'm not going to take one side or another. I think everyone's a bit over emotional. And I'm not saying that to be critical, because you want to know what? While I'm a member, this isn't my circus. This isn't my monkeys. I don't got to live here for the rest of the year. I understand. In a way, I'm actually inspired by the fact that people were so emotional, because it means that they love this party deeply. So that's a good thing. It's a good thing there were so many new people, but try to make them feel welcomed. And the ironic thing is next weekend is the Colorado convention. And some of the Mises people that were here being all emotional about their convention are going to come to Colorado and be the objective one. And I'm going to be the one all emotional and up in my feels because that will be Colorado and I've got to live with that. And I will not be objective probably at all when it comes to Colorado because we have our own shit fest going there. Now, what's going on in Colorado has nothing to do with caucuses. Thank God. We don't have the Mises caucus, anti-caucus thing here. We've got one guy there who nobody really pays any attention to that is an anti-Mises rabble-rouser, but it's insignificant. Like, go away, shoe fly. Our issues actually are worse. Caucus fighting sometimes is understandable. It's almost like tribal. In Colorado, it's deep personal animosities and petty grudges and slanders. It's worse, I think. And I don't know how Colorado is going to turn out. I'm very nervous about it. I hope it turns out well. I hope everyone just says it's not worth it. Let's move on. But let me tell you something tonight while I was talking with various people. And they kept talking and they'd be, but I'm just going to throw names out here that aren't real names. But Jimmy did this. But Carol did this. And I kept saying, what are we here for? Is it liberty? Okay, it's liberty. And then, but I go, if it's about liberty, why am I hearing about Jimmy and David and Carol? Seems to me for you guys, it's not about liberty. It's about Jimmy, David, and Carol. Can we move past that? That's why I really don't like naming names. I like depersonalizing because what are we really here for? We're here for liberty, right? If Jimmy, David, and Carol are getting in the way or are bad actors, do whatever you can to just stay away from them and neutralize their bad acts, but don't make it personal because it's not about them. It's about liberty. Do you think the people who are sitting in jail right now for having a plant give a shit about your personal problems with Jimmy, Carol, and David? Do you really think that that matters as their life is wasting away? No, what matters to them is liberty, and that which needs to matter to you. And I think if we all kept our eyes on the higher prize and realized this isn't, as I said, let's stop LARPing. This isn't a game. There are real people we can help whose lives are being destroyed. Don't let personal, and believe me, I need to hear this from myself just as much as anyone. Because, as I said, in Colorado, there is some real deep personal animosities, and I'm in the thick of it. I'm not innocent, little miss whatever. Because when I get hot and up in my feels, you all know, I don't hold my tongue, and maybe sometimes I should. I'm not perfect, though I do hope that when it's pointed out that I've crossed the line, that I apologize. I do apologize very often because, again, I got a big mouth. And I've got hot blood. I do get up in my feels and sometimes go too far. So can we remember it's about liberty? And maybe ask everyone when it's over to see if we can put aside that and offer genuine olive branches. And if a genuine olive branch is offered to you, will you take it? There's a thing about history. History is my thing. This saying is about ancient history. But you want to know what? I kind of apply it even to yesterday, let's put it. Yesterday's history. And this saying is that when you're examining the past, you need to judge it on its own merits and not by the standards of today. So the saying goes, the past is like a foreign country. People live differently there. But I think that's almost like yesterday. You're a new person tomorrow. Yesterday is like a foreign country. People live differently there. And if those people can agree to not settle scores, if a genuine olive branch is offered, I would really encourage you to do that. But I will say, quite honestly, this is coming from my religious tradition. And I'm not claiming it's better or worse than anyone. I'm not trying to be a holier than thou thing. I'm just saying that's how I was raised. Forgive and forget. Though I know it can be hard to forgive if somebody hasn't apologized. But realize sometimes that somebody really doesn't think they're wrong. And things get so complicated, sometimes it's not exactly clear. So grace should triumph over justice. Kindness should triumph over revenge. And those are words I got to tell myself each day, because I ain't no fucking saint. This bitch gets angry. But as an outsider looking in, I'm trying to give my objective perspective. And I'm going to need that from you next weekend when it comes to Colorado. I'm going to need you outsiders looking in to give every one of us in Colorado some perspective. Because that's going to be my thing. I hope what I've said has been useful. And just know that I've been to a lot of conventions I'm in my 6th year now on the LNC. And I was Region 1 before, which meant I had like 9 states. I went to all of their conventions. I've gone to a lot of conventions. I've seen a lot. This isn't the worst I've seen. So I'm bringing a lot of experience into this. So I hope you at least consider what I have to say. I might not be right. I could be completely off base, but that's just how I see it. So let's take a look at comments here. Oh yeah, Jack, aren't those flames awesome? That's why I positioned it right here. I love it, but they need to be pink flames. It needs to be the pink flames of liberty, right? And you know what I ate earlier is still bothering me. I'm like, oh, my guts have been, I know TMI, they've just been protesting. Oh my God, I don't know what it was, but me and food has to do with the autism. People with autism have a lot of intestinal issues. But anyway, I think that's it. And I'll report back tomorrow. Thank you so much, those of you who like to get into the inside baseball of all of this. I'll close as I usually do with thanking my patrons. If you do enjoy this kind of commentary and learning more and getting into the nitty-gritty, will you please, if you can, I know a lot of people can't. I confess that I'm in a lot of financial trouble right now. You might be too. Patreon.com/Pink Flame of Liberty. You would touch my heart and really, really assist me if you can. That's all I'm going to say on that. We are doing some patron-only discussion of Fear and Loathing on the Campaign Trail. I am about a week and a half behind, but when I come back, this is convention season. My life goes in a blur. We will continue, and now I probably should get to bed because I got to go do the convention parliamentarian shit at 9 o'clock tomorrow morning, and I will talk to you later. Love you all. Bye-bye.
You gotta take what you're given, that's how we live it. Don't be mad at the system, it's simply how we've existed. I hear a lot of people talking like they politicians or choose to be an accountant because it's safe in the business.